So, hello, and welcome back to me having a frog in my throat. That's exciting. Welcome back to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which we only have 3 chapters left. Granted, the last chapter is a doozy, but yeah, we are going to be reading, I guess, 1 chapter a night and culminating in a couple of nights. So, I still don't like Victor. He obviously made a bad impression on me, and I don't have a lot of sympathy for him. He's on his way back to Geneva. He still hasn't dealt with the monster, and I mean, granted, we cannot assume what a second creation would have awakened to. You know, it might be just like in the Bride of Frankenstein movies where she is utterly horrified by her intended mate, but we can't know that because Victor decided to just destroy it, and so the monster has sworn everlasting vengeance upon Victor Frankenstein and his family. Now, do I think that the monster is justified in killing innocent people just because they're related to Victor? No. But do I have sympathy for the monster in wanting to take out his creator? Kinda. I mean, I'm definitely coming down more on the monster side than I am on Victor's side in this. He seems like he's done everything wrong. That might just be a me take. I might just have far too much sympathy with monsters, but that's kind of where I'm landing on this. I'm kind of curious where you are landing on this. Are you team monster still? I'm still team monster. That is definitely for sure. Anyway, we're going to jump into it. I guess I'm going to say this now. Hit the thumbs up on the video when you get to the end if you enjoyed it. And with that, let's jump into Frankenstein by Mary Shelley with Volume 3, Chapter 5. The voyage came to an end. We landed and proceeded to Paris. I soon found that I had overtaxed my strength and that I must repose before I could continue my journey. My father's care and attentions were indeflaggable. That is a weird word. My father's care and attentions were unending, but he did not know the origin of my suffering, and he sought erroneous methods to remedy the incurable ill. He wished me to seek amusement and society. I abhorred the very face of man. Oh, not abhorred. They were my brethren, my fellow beings, and I felt attracted even to the most repulsive among them as creatures of angelic nature and celestial mechanicisms. But I felt that I had no right to share their intercourse. I had unchained an enemy among them, whose joy it was to shed their blood and to revel in their cries. How they would, each of them, hate me and hunt me from the world if they knew my unhallowed acts and the crime which had their source in me. My father yielded at length to my desire to avoid society, and he strove by various arguments to banish my despair. Sometimes he thought that I felt deeply the degradation of being obliged to answer a charge of murder, and he endeavored to prove to me the futility of my pride. Alas, my father said, or alas, my father, I said. How little do you know me? Human beings, their feelings and passions would indeed be degraded if such a wretch as I felt pride. Justine, Poor, unhappy Justine was as innocent as I, and she suffered the same charge and died for it. And I am the cause of it. I murdered her. William, Justine, and Henry, they all died by my hands. My father had often, during my imprisonment, heard me make this same assertion. When I thus accused myself, he sometimes seemed to want an explanation, and at other times he appeared to consider it as the offspring of my delirium, and that during my illness some idea of this kind had presented itself in my imagination, the remembrance of which I persevered in during my convalescence. I avoided the explanation, and I maintained a continual silence concerning the wretch that I had created. I had a persuasion that I would be thought mad, and this in itself would forever have chained my tongue, but along with that, I could not bring myself to disclose a secret which would fill my hearer with consternation and make fear and unnatural horror the intimate friends of his breast. I checked, therefore, my impatient thirst for sympathy, and I was silent when I would have given the word to have confided that secret. Yet still words like those I have recorded would have burst from me. I could offer no explanation of them, but their truth in part relieved the burden of my mysterious woes. Upon this occasion, my father said, with an expression of unbound wonder, "Dear Victor, what infatuation is this? My dear son, I entreat you never make such an assertion again." "I am not mad," I cried. "The sun and the heavens, who have viewed me, can bear witness to my truth. I am the assassin of those most innocent victims. They died by my machinations. 1,000 times would I have shed my own blood, drop by drop, to have saved them, but I couldn't. My father, indeed, I could not sacrifice the whole human race." The conclusion of my speech convinced my father that my ideas were deranged, and he instantly changed the subject of our conversation, and he endeavored to alter the course of my thoughts. He wished, as much as he could, to obliterate the memory of the scenes that had taken place in Ireland, and he never alluded to them or let me speak of my misfortunes. As time passed away, I became more calm. Misery had her dwelling in my heart, but I no longer talked in the same incoherent manner about my own crimes. Sufficient for me was knowing about them. By the utmost self-violence, I curbed the imperious voice of the wretchedness which sometimes wanted to declare itself to the entire world, and my manners were calmer and more composed than they had ever been since my journey to the Sea of Ice. A few days before we left Paris, on our way back to Switzerland, I received the following letter from Elizabeth. My dear friend, it gave me the greatest pleasure to receive a letter from my uncle dated at Paris. You are no longer at a formidable distance, and I may hope to see you in less than a fortnight. Poor cousin, how much you must have suffered! I expect to see you looking even more ill than when you left Geneva. This winter has been passed more miserably, tortured as I have been by anxious suspense. Yet I hope to see peace on your face, and to find that your heart is not totally void of comfort and tranquility. Yet I fear that the same feelings now exist that made you so miserable a year ago, and perhaps even augmented by time. I would not disturb you at this period, when so many misfortunes weigh on you, but a conversation I had with my uncle before he departed renders some explanation necessary before we are to meet. Explanation, you may possibly say. What can Elizabeth have to explain? If you say this, my questions are answered and all my doubts satisfied. But you are far from me, and it is possible that you may dread and yet be pleased with this explanation. And in a probability of this being the case, I dare not any longer postpone writing what during your absence I have often wished to express to you, but never had the courage to begin. You well know, Victor, that our union had been the favorite plan of your parents since our infancy. We were told this when young and taught to look forward to it as an event that would certainly take place. We were affectionate playfellows during childhood, and I believe dear and valued friends to each other as we grew older. But as brother and sister often entertain a lively affection towards each other without desiring a more intimate union, might that also be our case? Tell me, dearest Victor, answer me, I beg you, for our mutual happiness with just the simple truth. Do you love another? You have traveled, you have spent years of your life at Ingolstadt, and I confess to you, my friend, when I saw you last autumn, so unhappy, flying to solitude, far away from the society of everyone, I could not help supposing that you might regret our connection, and believe yourself bound in honor to fulfill the wishes of your parents, although they oppose themselves to your own inclination. But this is false reasoning. I confess to you, my friend, that I love you, and that in my airy dreams of futurity, you have been my constant friend and companion. But it is your happiness that I desire as well as my own, when I declare to you that our marriage would render me eternally miserable unless it was by your own free will. Even now I weep to think that, borne down as you are by cruel misfortune, you might stifle, using the word honor, all hope of love and happiness which would restore you to yourself. I, who have so disinterested an affection for you, I might increase your misery tenfold by being an obstacle to your very wishes. Oh, Victor, be assured that your cousin and playmate has too sincere a love for you not to be made miserable by this. Be happy, my friend, and if you obey me in this one request, remain satisfied that nothing on earth will have the power to interrupt my tranquility. Do not let my letter disturb you. Do not answer tomorrow or the next day, or even until you come, if it will cause you pain. My uncle will send me news of your health, and if I see but one smile on your lips when we meet, occasioned by this or any other letter of mine, I won't need any more happiness. Signed, Elizabeth, Geneva. This letter revived in my memory what I had before forgotten, the threat of the fiend. I will be with you on your wedding night. Such was my sentence, and on that night would the demon employ all of his arts to destroy me and tear from me the glimpse of happiness which had promised partially to console my suffering. On that night he had determined to consummate his crimes by my death. Well, be it so, a deadly struggle would then assuredly take place, in which, if he were victorious, I would be at peace, and his power over me would be ended. If he were vanquished, I would be a free man. Alas, what freedom! Such as the peasant enjoys when his family has been massacred in front of his eyes, his cottage burnt, his lands laid waste, and he is adrift, homeless and penniless and alone, but free. That would be my liberty, except that in my Elizabeth I possessed a treasure. It balanced those horrors of remorse and guilt which would necessarily follow me forever. Sweet, beloved Elizabeth. I read and reread her letter, and some softened feelings stole into my heart and dared whisper dreams of love and joy, but the apple was already eaten, and the angel's arm barred to drive me from all hope. But I would die to make her happy. If the monster executed his threat, then death was inevitable. Yet again, I considered whether my marriage would bring my fate quicker. My destruction might indeed arrive a few months sooner, but if my torturer should suspect that I had postponed it, influenced by his menace, he would surely find other and maybe more dreadful ways of revenge. He had vowed to be with me on my wedding night, yet he did not consider that threat as binding him to a peace in the meanwhile. For, as if to show me that he was not yet satiated with blood, he had murdered Clerval immediately after giving me this threat. I resolved, therefore, that if my immediate union with my cousin would conduce either her or my father to happiness, then my adversary's designs against my life would not delay it, not even an hour. In this state of mind, I wrote to Elizabeth. My letter was calm and affectionate. "I fear, my beloved girl," I said, "little happiness remains for us on earth, yet all that I may one day enjoy is centered in you. Chase away your idle fears. To you alone do I consecrate my life and my endeavors for contentment. I have one secret, Elizabeth, a dreadful one. When revealed to you, it will chill your frame with horror, and then, far from being surprised at my misery, you will only wonder that I survive what I have endured. I will tell this tale of misery and terror to you the day after our marriage. For my sweet cousin, there must be perfect confidence between us. But until then, I beg you, do not mention or allude to it. This I earnestly entreat you, and I know you will comply." In about a week after the arrival of Elizabeth's letter, we returned to Geneva. The sweet girl welcomed me with warm affection, yet tears were in her eyes as she beheld my emaciated frame and feverish cheeks. I saw a change in her also. She was thinner and had lost much of that heavenly vivacity that had always charmed me. But her gentleness and her soft looks of compassion made her a better companion for one blasted and miserable as I am. The tranquility which I was enjoying did not endure. Memory brought madness with it, and when I thought of what had passed, a real insanity possessed me. Sometimes I was furious and burned with rage, sometimes low and despondent. I neither spoke nor looked at anyone, but sat motionless, bewildered by the multitude of miseries that overcame me. Only Elizabeth had the power to draw me out of these fits. Her gentle voice would soothe me when transported by passion, and inspire me with human feeling when I was sunk in torpor. She wept with me and for me. When reason returned, she would sympathize and endeavor to inspire me with resignation. It is well for the unfortunate to be resigned, but for the guilty there can be no peace. The agonies of remorse poison the luxury that there will otherwise sometimes be found in indulging in grief. Soon after my arrival, my father spoke of my immediate marriage with Elizabeth. I remained silent. "Do you have some other attachment?" he asked. "None," I told him. "I love Elizabeth, and I look forward to our union with delight. Let the day be fixed, and on it I will consecrate myself in life or death to the happiness of my cousin. My dear Victor, he said, do not speak thus. Heavy misfortunes have befallen us, but let us only cling closer to what remains and transfer our love for those who we have lost to those who still live. Our circle will be small, but bound close by the ties of affection and our mutual misfortune. And while time will have softened your despair, new and dear objects of care will be born that will replace those of whom we have been deprived. Such were the lessons of my father. But to me, the remembrance of the creature's threat returned. You cannot wonder that, omnipotent as the fiend had been in his deeds of blood, I should almost regard him as invincible, and that when he had pronounced that he will be with me on my wedding night, that I should regard the fate as unavoidable. But death was no evil to me, if the loss of Elizabeth were balanced with it, and I therefore, with a contented and even cheerful demeanor, agreed with my father that if my cousin would consent, the ceremony would take place in 10 days. And so that put, I imagined, the seal on my fate. Good God! If for one instant I had thought what might be the hellish intention of my adversary, I would have banished myself forever from my native home and wandered as an outcast over the earth, than to have consented to this miserable marriage. But, as if possessed of magical powers, the monster had blinded me to his intention, and when I thought that I had prepared only my own death, I just hastened the death of a far dearer victim. As the period fixed for our marriage drew near, whether from cowardice or a prophetic feeling, I could feel my heart sink within me, but I hid these feelings behind an appearance of hilarity that brought smiles and joy to the face of my father. They hardly deceived the ever-watchful eye of Elizabeth, though. She looked forward to our union with a placid contentment, not unmixed with a bit of fear, which past misfortunes had impressed, and what now appeared certain intangible happiness, which could dissipate into an airy dream and leave nothing but deep regret. Preparations were made for the event. Congratulatory visits were received, and everyone wore smiles. I shut up, as well as I could, in my own heart the anxiety that was there, and I entered with seeming earnestness into the plans of my father, although they might only serve as decorations to my tragedy. Through my father's exertions, a part of the inheritance of Elizabeth had been restored to her by the Austrian government. It was agreed, immediately after our union, that we should proceed to Villa Lavenza and spend our first days of happiness beside the beautiful lake by which it stood. In the meantime, I took every precaution to defend my person in case the fiend should openly attack me. I carried pistols and a dagger constantly on me, and I was ever on the watch to prevent any artifice, and by these means I gained a greater degree of tranquillity. Indeed, as the wedding approached, the threat appeared more like a delusion, not to be regarded as worthy to disturb my peace, and the happiness that I hoped for in my marriage became a greater certainty as the day fixed for it drew nearer, and I heard it continually spoken of as an occurrence in which no possible accident could prevent. Elizabeth seemed happy. My tranquil demeanor contributed greatly and calmed her mind. But on the day that was to fulfill my wishes and destiny, She was melancholy, and a presentiment of evil seemed to pervade her. And perhaps also she thought of the dreadful secret which I had promised to reveal to her on the next day. But my father was in the meantime overjoyed, and in the bustle of preparation he only recognized in the melancholy of his niece the diffidence on any bride. After the ceremony was performed, a large party assembled at my father's house, but it was agreed that Elizabeth and I should commence our journey by water, sleeping that night at Evian, and continuing our voyage the next day. The day was fair, the wind was favorable, and all smiled on our nuptial embarkation. These were the last moments of my life during which I enjoyed the feeling of happiness. We passed rapidly along. The sun was hot, but we were sheltered from its rays by a kind of canopy while we enjoyed the beauty of the scene. Sometimes on one side of the lake, where we saw Mount Saleve, the pleasant banks of Montlarge, and at a distance, topping it all, the beautiful Mont Blanc, and the assemblage of snowy mountains that in vain endeavor to emulate her. Sometimes, coasting the opposite banks, we could see the mighty Jura opposing its dark side to the ambition that would quit its native country, and an almost insurmountable barrier to any invader who would wish to come into it. I took Elizabeth's hand. "You are sorrowful, my love," I said. "Ah, if you only knew what I have suffered and what I yet may endure, you would endeavor to let me taste quiet and freedom from despair on this one day would let us enjoy." "Oh, be happy, Victor," said Elizabeth. "There is, I hope, nothing that distresses you, and be assured that if a lively joy is not on my face, my heart is content. Something whispers to me not to depend too much on the prospect that is opened before us, but I will not listen to that inner voice. Look at how fast we move along, and how the clouds, which sometimes obscure and sometimes rise above Mont Blanc, render this scene of beauty even more interesting. Look also at the fish that are swimming in the clear waters, where we can see every pebble at the bottom. What a divine day! How happy and serene all of nature appears." Thusly, Elizabeth endeavored to divert her thoughts and mine away from all reflection upon melancholy, but her temper was fluctuating. Joy, and for a few instants, did shine in her eyes, but it would continually give way to distraction and dreams. The sun sank low in the heavens. We passed the river Drance and observed its path through the chasms of the higher and valleys and glens of the hills. The Alps here come closer to the lake, and we approached the amphitheater of the mountains which forms the eastern boundary. The spire of Evian shone under the woods that surrounded it, and the range of the mountains above the mountains by which it was being overhung. The wind, which had hitherto carried us along with amazing speed, sank at sunset to a light breeze. The soft air just ruffled the water, and it caused a pleasant motion among the trees as we approached the shore, from which it wafted with the most delightful scent of flowers and hay. The sun sank beneath the horizon as we landed, and as I touched the shore, I felt those cares and fears revive which were soon to clasp me, soon to cling to me forever. And that is the end of chapter 5. So Victor is married. Elizabeth seems to sense that something's wrong, and Victor, as always. I mean, she could be just having like wedding night jitters, and who could blame her? He's very moody, and I don't know that I'd want to be alone with him. But he makes it all about himself. Yep, I'm going to berate Victor yet again. She expresses her fear, and he turns it around and is like, "Oh, you think you're afraid? Well, you have nothing to be afraid of compared to me." I don't like Victor. I don't think I'm going to like Victor by the end of this book, because I still don't like Victor. I don't know. Also, Evian, like the spring water, it does bring up beautiful thoughts. I wonder if Evian always had spring water, or if it was just something that they like stumbled upon in the 80s to make lots of money. Except I know that some of those places, like Perrier water, has been around for hundreds of years. So maybe Evian's always been a good spring water place. I don't know. That was the weird thought that came to me as I read that. I was like, Evian? Like the water? Anyway, thank you as always for listening. 2 more nights with Mary Shelley, and then it will be on to a new book. Thank you as always for listening. I really do appreciate it. Please do hit the thumbs up as you're leaving. It does always make me smile, and I will see you tomorrow.